Dawn Walker had always been described as someone who carried a quiet grace. She grew up in a modest neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked and neighbors gathered for barbecues on summer nights. Dawn, the only daughter of a retired firefighter and a school librarian, became the town's pride. Her warm personality made her loved by children and adults alike, and her dedication to her work as a school teacher gave her a reputation of patience and kindness. For years, she seemed content with her life, but when she met Daniel Harris, her world began to change in ways no one could have predicted. Daniel wasn't from the same small town. He was a businessman from the nearby city, polished, confident, and ambitious. He met Dawn by chance at a charity fundraiser. She had been there to help organize, and he had attended as a donor. Their first conversation was brief, but witnesses later remembered the way Daniel's eyes lingered on her. What started as a polite exchange soon grew into something deeper. Within months, the pair were inseparable, their romance unfolding like something out of a fairy tale. When Daniel proposed, he did so in grand fashion at a lakeside restaurant surrounded by friends and family. Dawn said yes with tears streaming down her face, and the room erupted with cheers. The town buzzed with excitement, eager for the wedding that promised to be the event of the year. Dawn seemed happy, but some quietly noticed that her smile didn't always reach her eyes. She brushed off concerns, attributing her stress to wedding planning. The wedding day itself could not have been more perfect. The ceremony took place in a picturesque garden, draped in white roses and twinkling lights. The sun cast a golden glow on Dawn as she walked down the aisle in her gown, every step filled with elegance. Guests admired the way she looked at Daniel, her expression tender and full of trust. The vows were heartfelt, promising a lifetime of devotion. When they kissed, the crowd applauded, some wiping away tears. It seemed like a love story sealed in perfection. But the reception carried on late into the night. Laughter echoed under the tent as glasses clinked and music played. Friends toasted to the couple's future while children danced barefoot on the grass. Dawn moved gracefully through the crowd, greeting guests, hugging family, and holding Daniel's hand tightly. Photographers captured every smile, every joyful tear, and every fleeting glance. To anyone watching, it was a night of pure bliss. But beneath the sparkle of champagne and fairy lights, not everything was as it seemed. Tension stirred in small ways, almost too subtle to notice. Some guests recalled seeing Dawn step away more than once, looking troubled as though something weighed heavily on her mind. Others whispered about people at the wedding who seemed out of place, faces lingering at the edge of the celebration. Among them was her former fiancé, Michael Reeves, whose presence raised quiet eyebrows. While Dawn and Daniel danced as though nothing else in the world mattered, Michael sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the bride. As the night wore on, the party began to fade. Guests slowly departed, leaving only the closest family and friends. Dawn's laughter still filled the air, but for those who paid close attention, there were cracks in the happiness. It was as though the bride knew her story was not going to end with a happily ever after. By the stroke of midnight, as the celebration wound down and the newlyweds retreated to their honeymoon suite, the fairy tale slipped quietly into the shadows. No one realized that those final hours of the wedding night would become the opening act of a chilling tragedy. The morning after what was supposed to be the happiest night of her life, everything unraveled. At 6:30 a.m., a panic call went out from the honeymoon suite. Dawn Walker was missing. The room that had been prepared with rose petals, champagne, and soft music looked nothing like the romantic setting it had been only hours before. Instead, it appeared as though chaos had erupted. A wine glass lay shattered near the bed, the sharp fragments glittering in the early light. Dark stains on the carpet suggested blood. The once carefully arranged bouquet of white lilies lay crushed against the floor. It was as if joy had been violently stripped away in the middle of the night. Police responded quickly, sealing off the hotel floor as guests whispered in confusion. Some recalled hearing noises around 2 in the morning. Thuds, a muffled cry, but no one had thought to report it at the time. They assumed it was just another couple celebrating. Security footage offered the first real clue. At exactly 7 a.m., Dawn appeared in the hallway still wearing a silk robe. She seemed unsteady, as if dizzy or drugged, and walked toward the back exit of the hotel. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Her dress from the reception was found torn and tossed aside as though discarded in haste. Investigators scoured the honeymoon suite, photographing every inch. They discovered smudged fingerprints on the balcony door and faint traces of mud on the carpet. Outside, near the garden, faint shoe impressions led away from the building, but they ended abruptly at the parking lot. It was clear that Dawn had left the hotel under circumstances far from ordinary. The disappearance stunned the small town. Word spread quickly, and soon her wedding photos, taken only hours earlier, were plastered across newspapers and television screens. Headlines screamed about the missing bride while reporters gathered outside the hotel, eager for answers. Family members insisted Dawn would never run away. Friends echoed the same sentiment, describing her as devoted and trustworthy, yet questions lingered. Could she have had second thoughts? Could the pressure of marriage have driven her to flee? Investigators pushed deeper. They questioned guest staff and the groom himself. Daniel Harris appeared shaken, telling police he had woken in the night to find Dawn gone. He claimed he searched briefly before calling authorities. His account, however, left holes. Why hadn't he noticed the broken glass? Why hadn't he seen the blood? Doubt began to spread, and suspicion turned in his direction. The police also considered other possibilities. Surveillance cameras at the hotel's back entrance had malfunctioned that night, leaving a gap in the timeline. Witnesses claimed to have seen a shadowy figure near the parking lot shortly after Dawn vanished, but none could identify who it was. Theories swirled: an abduction, a jealous ex-lover, or perhaps something even more personal. By the end of that day, one fact was undeniable. A joyful wedding had transformed into a crime scene. Dawn Walker, the radiant bride whose smile had lit up the celebration, had stepped into the darkness and disappeared. What remained were broken fragments of a night that should have been filled with love, but instead was marked by terror. As investigators pushed further into the mystery, attention shifted from the night itself to the lives surrounding Dawn Walker. Every marriage has a story behind it, and as detectives peeled back the layers of Dawn and Daniel's relationship, disturbing truths began to surface. What had once looked like a romance built on trust and devotion started to show cracks that no one at the wedding had noticed. The first red flag came in the form of a familiar face, Michael Reeves, Dawn's former fiancé. Theirs had been a serious relationship that ended abruptly 3 years earlier. Friends remembered the breakup as painful and complicated. Michael had wanted to settle down quickly while Dawn hesitated, worried about his temper. When the engagement ended, it wasn't amicable. Harsh words were exchanged and the bitterness lingered. Daniel's claim that he had woken to find his wife missing was scrutinized closely. How could he not have noticed the violent struggle in the room? The bloodstains, the shattered glass, and the signs of forced movement all pointed to a chaotic confrontation. His explanation seemed thin, and combined with the life insurance policy, suspicion around him grew heavier. But Michael Reeves remained equally suspicious. Forensic teams uncovered fingerprints belonging to him on the back door of the hotel, a door that should have only been used by staff. When questioned, he insisted he had used it earlier in the evening to step outside for air. Investigators, however, doubted his story. Witnesses had reported seeing him loitering near the parking lot around the same time Dawn was last seen. The possibility that he had followed her out of the suite and confronted her could not be ignored. The town was shaken to its core. Vigils were held in Dawn's memory, with mourners leaving candles and flowers outside her classroom, where she had once inspired children with her gentle encouragement. Yet beneath the grief was an undercurrent of suspicion. Some were certain Daniel had orchestrated the crime for financial gain, while others whispered that Michael's obsession had turned deadly. Families and friends divided into camps, each convinced they knew the truth. Despite all the theories, the evidence remained stubbornly inconclusive. The muddy footprints found outside the hotel were too smudged to match with certainty. The sedatives in Dawn's system could not be traced to a clear source. Both men had motives, but neither could be definitively tied to the act of murder. What was once a case of a missing bride had now become a twisted puzzle, with every answer leading only to more questions. As investigators struggled, one haunting image lingered in their minds: the grainy security footage of Dawn at 2:07 a.m. walking unsteadily down the hallway, unaware she was being led toward her death. That single moment became the chilling reminder that somewhere in the shadows of her wedding night, someone had already decided her fate. Months passed, and the investigation into Don Walker's murder seemed to drift into silence. The initial burst of media coverage slowed, the cameras left the hotel grounds, and the town began to move forward, though the shadow of the tragedy remained. For detectives, however, the unanswered questions were impossible to ignore. They had two prime suspects, both with compelling motives, yet neither could be placed at the scene with certainty. The case threatened to go cold until an overlooked clue shifted everything. It began with a re-examination of security footage from nearby businesses. Investigators combed through hours of grainy recordings, desperate for anything that might have slipped past in the early stages. One camera at a gas station, about a mile from the hotel, captured something startling at 2:25 a.m. Less than 20 minutes after Dawn was last seen in the hallway, a woman was spotted driving Dawn's car. The headlights caught her face for just a few seconds, but it was enough for detectives to recognize her. The woman was not Dawn, nor was it Daniel or Michael. It was Clara Harris, Daniel's estranged sister. Clara had been barely mentioned in the early investigation. She had attended the wedding but left quietly before the reception ended, or so it had seemed. She had a strained relationship with her brother, marked by years of disputes over money, inheritance, and loyalty to their late parents. Clara had always felt overlooked, convinced that Daniel received more love, more opportunity, and more recognition. When he married Dawn, her resentment deepened. To her, Dawn represented everything she felt had been stolen from her, a symbol of the life she believed she deserved. Detectives confronted Clara with the footage. At first, she denied involvement, claiming she had borrowed Dawn's car for an errand, but her story unraveled quickly. Confronted with forensic evidence linking her to fibers found on Dawn's robe, Clara broke. In a chilling confession, she revealed the depth of her hatred. She admitted to drugging Dawn during the reception by slipping sedatives into her drink, waiting until the night grew quiet before slipping into the honeymoon suite. She described how she struck Dawn in a moment of rage, staging the scene to look like a struggle with someone else. Clara then dragged her unconscious body through the back exit, loaded her into the car, and drove to the river. There, under the cover of darkness, she pushed her into the water, convinced the current would erase her crime. The confession stunned both investigators and the community. For months, suspicion had circled around Daniel and Michael, but neither man had delivered the fatal blow. Instead, it had been someone far closer, someone hiding in plain sight. Clara's hatred had poisoned her to the point of murder, and she now faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Daniel, the truth was both a relief and a crushing burden. Though cleared of suspicion, he was left to grapple with the betrayal of his own sister and the devastating loss of his wife. For Michael, suspicion lifted as well, but he remained haunted by the idea that his presence at the wedding would forever be tied to tragedy. The town, once buzzing with theories, fell into a somber silence, struggling to process the cruel twist of fate. Dawn Walker's story ended not with a fairy tale marriage, but with a brutal act of jealousy that tore apart everything she had hoped for. Her murder became a reminder that evil does not always come from strangers or distant threats. Sometimes it emerges from those closest, hidden beneath years of resentment and bitterness. The case of Dawn Walker left behind grief, anger, and unanswered questions about how love and celebration could so quickly transform into horror. It became one of the most haunting stories the town would ever remember, a wedding night forever marked by betrayal and death.